My parents asked me to leave because my twin sister became pregnant. Years later, she showed up at my door, insisting on moving in. I'm a 28-year-old with a story that sounds like it's straight out of a TV show, but trust me, every word is true, and I carry the emotional scars to prove it. Imagine growing up knowing you weren't truly wanted, not in the accidental way, but in a much more deliberate manner. That was me, the less desired half of a twin pair. My parents wanted a daughter, and they got one, along with an unexpected addition, me. For years, I carried this knowledge like a heavy weight on my chest, affecting every interaction, every family dinner, and every birthday. The resentment grew deep inside me, taking root in my psyche. I'm not writing this out of anger anymore. No, I'm writing this as someone who has walked through the challenges of family dynamics and come out on the other side, bruised but unbroken. This is a story about favoritism taken to the extreme. It's about a childhood where hand-me-downs were more than just clothes, they were a way of life. It's about being pushed out of your own home and finding strength in the most unlikely places. But most importantly, it's about learning that sometimes the family you choose is more valuable than the one you're born into. So, if you've ever felt like the black sheep, the overlooked child, or just someone struggling to find their place in a world that seems against them, this story is for you. It's not a tale of overnight success or easy solutions. It's messy, it's painful, and at times it might make you emotional. Let me take you on a journey through the ups and downs of my life, from sleeping in a tent in my parents' backyard to buying my own house, from feeling worthless to standing up for myself against all odds. It's been a wild ride, and I'm finally ready to share it with you all. Growing up, our house wasn't just divided, it was a fortress, with me on the outside. From day one, it was clear who the star of the show was, and spoiler alert, it wasn't me. My twin sister might as well have been an only child for all the attention and love she received. You know how some kids get the lion's share of their parents' affection? Well, my sister got everything. New clothes. She had a wardrobe that would make a princess jealous, while I was lucky if I got a new pair of socks for Christmas. But it wasn't just about material things, no, that would have been too simple. It was the little things, the day-to-day reminders that I was the unwanted addition in this family picture. My sister's toys were off-limits to me, and I learned quickly that in our house, some were more equal than others. School offered no refuge either. Parent-teacher conferences were a joke. My parents would gush over my sister's finger paintings like they were masterpieces, while my report card might as well have been invisible. "Why can't you be more like your sister?" became the unofficial family motto, etched into my mind. In this storm of favoritism and neglect, there was one beacon of light, my grandfather. He was the only one who saw me, really saw me. With him, I wasn't the unwanted twin or the family disappointment, I was just me. He taught me to fish, told me stories about his youth, and for a few precious hours each week, made me feel like I mattered. But life has a way of taking away the good things, doesn't it? When I was 13, my grandfather passed away, and with him went the only balance in our lopsided family dynamic. After his death, the contrast became even sharper. My sister's achievements were celebrated, while my existence was barely acknowledged. I was the family ghost, present, but never truly seen or heard. Every day was a reminder that I was the backup, the spare. The resentment grew inside me like a weed, choking out any hope or self-esteem that tried to take root. I dreamed of the day I could leave, counting down the years, months, weeks until I could escape the house that never felt like home. And get any more complicated, my 16th birthday came around. While most kids were dreaming about driver's licenses and first cars, my twin sister decided to add to the drama by becoming pregnant. Now, in any normal family, this might have been a cause for concern, maybe even a serious conversation about life choices and responsibilities. But not in my family. No, my parents reacted as if my sister had just received the highest honor. They quickly arranged a wedding and decided that the newlyweds needed a proper place to start their family, right in our already cramped house. Their solution? Simple, I had to go. In the blink of an eye, I went from being the unwanted child to being homeless. My room, the one sanctuary I had in that house, was handed over to my sister and her new family. My belongings were tossed into garbage bags and dumped in the backyard like they were trash. I still remember the conversation, if you can call it that. My mother, with a smile, told me, "Your sister needs the space now. You're old enough to find a place for yourself, aren't you?" I was 16, the same age as my pregnant sister, but apparently, that didn't matter. I stood in our backyard with my life in garbage bags, wondering what to do next. The resentment that had been simmering for years suddenly boiled over. I was furious at my parents, at my sister, and at the world. With nowhere else to go, I did the only thing I could think of. I set up a tent in the backyard. While my sister was redecorating her new room, I was learning how to waterproof a tent. Living in a tent in your own backyard is a special kind of humiliation. I could hear the family dinners through the walls of the house, smell the home-cooked meals I was no longer welcome to share. Winter was the worst. Have you ever tried to do homework by flashlight while wearing multiple layers of clothes because it's freezing outside? School became a joke. How could I focus on algebra when I was worried about whether my tent would still be standing when I got home? My grades plummeted, but of course, no one noticed. They were all too busy focusing on my sister. But life has a way of throwing you a lifeline when you least expect it. For me, it came in the form of a local bakery. I had been scrounging for odd jobs to earn a few bucks for food and supplies. The owner, a gruff old guy named Frank, caught me eyeing the day-old bread one evening. Instead of chasing me off, he offered me a job. It wasn't much, just sweeping floors and helping with deliveries, but it came with a perk that felt like winning the lottery, a small room above the bakery where I could sleep. No more tent, no more shivering through the night. I had a roof over my head, even if it did smell like sourdough all the time. I dropped out of high school soon after. It wasn't an easy decision, but my education had taken a backseat to survival a long time ago. Besides, working at the bakery taught me more about life and hard work than I ever learned in a classroom. Frank became the father figure I never had. He was tough, sure, but fair. He taught me the value of hard work, the importance of showing up on time, and how to make a mean apple turnover. For the first time in my life, I felt like I had value. I wasn't just the unwanted twin or the family disappointment. I was a worker, a learner, someone with potential. The irony wasn't lost on me. Here I was, the black sheep of the family, working hard and learning real-life skills, while my sister was living comfortably on my parents' dime. The resentment was still there, a constant companion, but it was joined by something new, a fierce determination to prove them all wrong. Every early morning shift, every late night cleaning up, every new skill I mastered was my way of proving that I could succeed on my own. Life has a funny way of surprising you, doesn't it? One day, you're sleeping in a room that smells like yesterday's bread, and the next, you're walking into a car plant, hoping for a chance. That's where my story took its next turn. Leaving the bakery was tough. Frank had become more of a father to me than my own ever was. But we both knew I couldn't spend my life covered in flour, so when I heard the car plant was hiring, I figured, why not? The worst they could do was say no, right? Turns out, they said yes. I started on the assembly line, and let me tell you, it was a whole different world from kneading dough. The noise, the pace, the pressure, it was overwhelming at first, but I loved it. Every car that rolled off that line felt like a victory. I threw myself into the work, learned every job on that line, stayed late, came in early. The guys started calling me the machine. Not very creative, I know, but hey, I'll take it over the unwanted twin any day. People noticed, my supervisors, the plant manager, even the big bosses from corporate when they visited. 3 years in, they offered me a supervisor position, me, the high school dropout, now responsible for an entire shift. I almost laughed, not because it was funny, but because if my family could see me now, well, let's just say it would have been sweet. But success didn't magically erase all those years of hurt. Every promotion, every pay raise, every good job, from the higher-ups, a part of me was still that kid in the tent, desperate for approval. I'd lie awake at night imagining scenarios where I'd run into my family, show off my success, make them regret everything. The real game changer came 5 years in. I'd been saving every penny, living like I was still in that room above the bakery, and finally, I had enough to buy a house. Nothing fancy, mind you, a modest 3-bedroom in a decent neighborhood, but it was mine. The day I got the keys, I stood in the empty living room and just broke down, laughed, cried, probably looked like a lunatic to the neighbors. But in that moment, all I could think was, I did it. I did it without them, despite them. For the first time in my life, I had a real home, a place where I belonged, where no one could kick me out or make me feel unwanted. It wasn't just a house, it was a symbol of everything I had overcome. As I started furnishing the place, buying things I'd only dreamed of owning, a part of me wished I could invite Frank over, show him what his kindness had helped create. But another part was waiting. Waiting for the day when my so-called family would find out, because deep down, I knew it was only a matter of time before they came knocking, wanting a piece of what I built. And when that day came, I'd be ready. You know that feeling when you're watching a suspenseful movie, and you just know something's about to happen. That's how I felt the day my doorbell rang unexpectedly. Call it a sixth sense, call it intuition, but something in my gut told me this wasn't going to be the neighbor asking to borrow a cup of sugar. I opened the door, and there they were, my personal nightmare in the flesh. Mom, Dad, my sister, her husband, and, was that 3 kids? 4. I lost count. They stood there, smiling like they'd just won the lottery. In a way, I guess they thought they had. Surprise, my mom chirped, as if the last decade of neglect and abandonment was just a silly misunderstanding. We heard you bought a house, how wonderful. I stood there, frozen. I wanted to slam the door in their faces, demand answers for all those years of pain. Instead, I just stared, my hand gripping the doorknob so tight my knuckles turned white. My sister pushed past Mom, her latest baby on her hip. Nice place, bro, she said, eyeing the foyer like she was appraising it. Bet you've got plenty of room, huh? And there it was, the real reason for this little family reunion. I felt my jaw clench, years of resentment bubbling up inside me. Dad cleared his throat, always the diplomat. Son, we thought, well, with your sister's family growing and this big house of yours, maybe it's time to let bygones be bygones. Family should stick together, after all, I almost laughed. Family? Since when had I been family to them? But I bit my tongue, years of suppressing my feelings kicking in automatically. What exactly are you suggesting? I managed to ask, my voice surprisingly steady. Mom beamed, clearly taking my question as encouragement. Well, we thought we could all move in here, wouldn't that be lovely? One big happy family under one roof. One big happy family. The words echoed in my head, each repetition stoking the fire of resentment that had been burning for years. Images flashed through my mind, sleeping in a tent, working long hours at the bakery, the countless nights I'd cried myself to sleep, wondering why I wasn't good enough. And now, here they were, standing on the porch of the home I built with my own hard work, asking, no, demanding, to be let in, to take over, to push me aside again. I felt something snap inside me. Years of pent-up anger, hurt, and resentment came pouring out. No, I said, my voice low but firm. Absolutely not. The smiles faltered. Mom looked like I'd slapped her. But we're family, she sputtered. Family? I laughed, but there was no humor in it. Where was this family when you kicked me out at 16? Where was this family when I was sleeping in a tent in the backyard? Where was this family when I was working hard at the bakery or pulling double shifts at the plant? They stood there, shocked into silence. For once, I had their full attention. This house, this life I've built, I did it all on my own, without you, despite you. And now you think you can just walk in and claim it like you have any right to it. My sister stepped forward, her face twisted in that familiar pout that had always gotten her whatever she wanted. Come on, don't be selfish. We need the space, you owe us. I owe you? The words came out as a near growl. I owe you nothing, not a thing. You want space? Go find it somewhere else. This is my home, and you're not welcome here. Dad puffed up, his face reddening. Now listen here, son. No, you listen, I cut him off. I'm not a boy anymore. I'm a man who's done just fine without you, and I'll continue to do fine without you. Now get off my property before I call the police. They stood there, gaping as if they couldn't believe what they were hearing. As if the idea that I might refuse them had never crossed their minds, and you know what? It probably hadn't. Leave, I said, my voice quiet but filled with resolve. Slowly, disbelievingly, they turned and walked away. I watched them go, my heart pounding, hands shaking. As their car pulled away, I closed the door and leaned against it, sliding down to sit on the floor. I'd done it. I'd finally stood up to them. The relief was overwhelming, but so was the sadness, not for losing them, I'd lost them years ago. No, I was mourning the family I never had, the support I'd never known. You'd think that after being told to leave in no uncertain terms, my family would have gotten the message. But if there's one thing I've learned, it's that difficult people don't give up easily. They are like weeds, you think you've gotten rid of them, but they always find a way to creep back in. It was about a week after the uninvited visit. I was just starting to relax, to believe that maybe, just maybe, I'd finally closed that chapter of my life. I should have known better. I woke up in the middle of the night to the sound of breaking glass. At first, I thought I was dreaming, some leftover nightmare from my days of sleeping in a tent, maybe. But then I heard voices, hushed, but familiar. My sister's sharp whisper, her husband's low grumble. For a moment, I just lay there, frozen. This couldn't be happening, they couldn't be this bold, this entitled. But as I heard footsteps creeping up the stairs, reality sank in. They were really doing this. They were breaking into my home. I got up, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I grabbed my phone, ready to call the police, but something stopped me. Some misplaced sense of family loyalty, maybe. Or perhaps I just couldn't believe it had come to this. I stepped out into the hallway, and there they were, my sister, her husband, and two of their kids, loaded down with bags and suitcases. They froze when they saw me, like deer in headlights. What followed was a heated argument, accusations, and demands. My sister, ever the victim, claimed that I was leaving them homeless, that I was tearing the family apart. Her husband, emboldened, got in my face, telling me I had no right to keep them out. Years of pent-up anger and hurt came boiling to the surface. I yelled back, told them exactly what I thought of their entitlement, their audacity. The argument got intense, and in the scuffle, I was pushed hard. I stumbled backward, hitting my head on the corner of a wall. Pain shot through me, and I felt warm blood trickle down my neck. That was the last straw. Dazed and angry, I finally did what I should have done the moment I heard the glass break. I called the police. What happened next was like something out of a TV drama. The police arrived, sirens blaring, lighting up the quiet suburban street. My sister and her husband immediately started spinning a story about how I had invited them and how I had attacked them. But they hadn't counted on one thing. My neighbor, Mrs. Harrington, had seen the whole thing. She'd watched them break in, heard the shouting, and seen me stumble out onto the front lawn. Her testimony, along with the broken window and my injury, was all the police needed. I pressed charges. It wasn't an easy decision, but as I watched them being led away, I knew it was the right one. Enough was enough. It was time to set boundaries, not just with words, but with actions. I got a restraining order against my sister and her husband. It felt surreal taking legal action against my own family, but with each passing day, I felt a little lighter, a little freer. Just when I thought the dust had settled, just when I was starting to believe that maybe, finally, I could move on with my life, they tried again. This time, it was my parents. They showed up on a Sunday afternoon, looking older and more tired than I remembered. For a moment, I felt a pang of something, not quite sympathy, but an echo of the connection we once had, or should have had. But then they started talking, and any warm feelings quickly evaporated. They had a whole story prepared, how they were getting older, how they couldn't support my sister and her family anymore, how they were struggling financially, how they needed a place to stay. It was manipulation, pure and simple. They hit all the classic guilt triggers: family obligation, respect for elders, the struggles of old age. They painted themselves as victims of circumstance, conveniently forgetting their role in creating the very situation they were complaining about. I listened more out of shock than anything else. The audacity was breathtaking. Here they were, the people who had asked me to leave at 16, who had chosen my sister over me time and time again, asking for my help, demanding it, really, under the guise of family duty. I stood there, listening to their well-practiced speech, and something strange happened. I felt the old anger, the old hurt, but it was different now, distant, somehow, like looking at an old photograph of yourself and barely recognizing the person in it. I realized in that moment that I felt sorry for them, these sad, manipulative people who had never learned to take responsibility for their actions, who had burned every bridge and were now surprised to find themselves alone. But feeling sorry for them didn't mean I owed them anything. It didn't erase the years of neglect, the favoritism, the pain they had caused. And it certainly didn't mean I had to let them into my life or my home. So I told them no, calmly, firmly, without anger or resentment. I explained that while I understood their situation, I wasn't responsible for solving it. I reminded them of our history, of the choices they had made. I made it clear that while I didn't wish them harm, I also didn't want them in my life. They didn't take it well, of course. There were tears, accusations, attempts at guilt-tripping. But I stood my ground, and when they finally left, I didn't feel guilty, I felt relieved, empowered. It was a turning point for me. Standing there on my porch, watching them drive away, I realized something important. The resentment, the anger that had driven me for so long, it wasn't gone, exactly, but it no longer controlled me. I had built a life for myself, a good life, despite everything they had done. I had won, not by proving anything to them, but by living well in spite of them. Update: it's been months since the break-in incident and my parents' failed attempt to move in. The dust has settled, and I've been focusing on moving forward, building a life that is truly mine. I've learned to let go, to find peace, not in forgiveness, but in acceptance of what happened and who I've become because of it. In a moment of what I can only describe as misguided nobility, I decided to visit my sister. Maybe it was closure I was after, or maybe some part of me still clung to the idea of family. Whatever it was, I found myself sitting across from her in a sterile visitation room, the years of hurt and betrayal hanging in the air between us. She looked different, harder, older. The sparkle of the favored child was long gone from her eyes. We sat in uncomfortable silence for what felt like an eternity. I was about to leave, wondering what I'd been thinking coming here, when she spoke. What she said next shook me to my core. With a bitter laugh, she revealed a truth I never saw coming. Our grandfather, the only person who had ever shown me real love and support, hadn't forgotten me after all. He had left me an inheritance, a substantial one at that. The shock must have shown on my face because she continued, her words dripping with the same entitlement that had characterized our entire relationship. She spilled it all, how our parents had hidden the will, how they had been using my money all these years. The house I'd slept outside of in a tent. Technically, it had been mine. The money that had funded her weddings, her husband's failed ventures, her children's expensive clothes, all from my inheritance. I sat there, stunned, as the implications washed over me. Every struggle, every hardship I'd faced, sleeping in a tent, working countless hours at the bakery, scraping by to afford my education, none of it had been necessary. I'd had the means to support myself all along, but it had been taken from me by the very people who should have protected me. The weight of this betrayal was almost too much to bear. Years of being told I was selfish for not helping the family, of being made to feel worthless, it all came crashing down on me. The audacity, the sheer cruelty of what they'd done, it was staggering. My sister, oblivious to the storm raging inside me, seemed to think this revelation would provoke me, would reignite the family drama. Perhaps she thought I'd break down or lash out in anger. Maybe she was hoping to manipulate me into helping her again, dangling this information as bait. But she had miscalculated, badly. The last lingering threads of familial obligation, of misplaced loyalty, snapped. I felt a cold, calm clarity wash over me. Without a word, I stood up and walked out, her calls echoing behind me. Armed with the information my sister had unwittingly provided, I began the process of unraveling years of financial deceit. It wasn't just about the money, though that was rightfully mine, it was about justice, about finally standing up and saying no. No more. I pursued legal action against all of them, my parents, my sister, her husband, everyone who had benefited from the theft of my inheritance. The family that had discarded me, that had seen me as nothing more than a resource to be used and tossed aside, was about to face the consequences of their actions. As news of the legal action spread, extended family members and old acquaintances came out of the woodwork. Some offered support, others condemnation. I was called selfish, ungrateful, told that I was tearing the family apart. But for once, those words held no power over me. I knew the truth, and I was done letting their narrative control my life. The legal case became a media sensation in our small town. People love a good David versus Goliath story, and that's how it was painted. The abandoned son rising up against those who had wronged him. I tried to ignore the attention, focusing instead on the legal battle ahead. It was a long, draining process. Every day brought new revelations, new depths to my family's betrayal. The house my grandfather had lived in, the one full of warm memories of the only adult who had ever truly cared for me, had been sold. The money, which should have set me up for a comfortable life, had been squandered on unnecessary expenses and poor investments. As I write this, the legal case is ongoing. The wheels of justice turn slowly, but they are turning. I don't know what the outcome will be, how much, if anything, I'll recover. But in a way, that's not the point anymore. I don't know what the future holds. The hearing is next week, and regardless of the outcome, I know my life will never be the same. But for the first time in as long as I can remember, I'm not afraid. I'm ready to face whatever comes next on my own terms. To be continued, maybe. Life has taught me that you never really know what's waiting around the next corner. But whatever it is, I'll face it standing tall, secure in the knowledge of who I am and what I'm worth. And isn't that the greatest inheritance of all?